Chad Robichaux is joining me today. He's a former Force Recon Marine, and he is the president and founder of the Mighty Oaks Foundation. Chad, thank you so much for joining me today. It's great to see you again.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Of course. Now, in the past, we've talked about Afghanistan. We talked about, the escalation, the de-escalation, and the fallout there. I want to talk today about Ukraine and this looming threat that Russia poses. Now, when you look at everything that's happening in the news, what is your prediction for what's going to happen between Russia and Ukraine?
It's really, I think, dependent upon how the U.S. and the rest of the world responds. We have not seen the appropriate, what I would feel the appropriate, and many people would feel the appropriate response is from our White House, from the rest of the world, and putting the right preemptive things in place to prevent a full invasion of Russia into Ukraine, and also to prevent potentially, and I hate even saying this, it's scary to say this, an actual war between America and Russia, which is the ultimate, end all consequence of making the wrong decisions here. Sanctioning needs to be applied right away. Anybody with any kind of a understanding of warfare and understanding how to prevent countries around the world from doing the types of things we see in Russia do knows that sanctioning is the best way to do it. War is never an option. I spent most of my life involved in war. Anybody that's been involved in war knows that it's the last option we should have. And our State Department and our White House should be looking at every option to sanction Russia and to put pressure on Russia to do the right thing. I mean, the reason NATO was formed was really, in part to stop the Soviet Union from expanding its kingdom, and NATO came in to shut that down. And so, Russia, Vladimir Putin, does not want Ukraine to join NATO because NATO, then it would be attacking a NATO nation. And so he does not want any Soviet bloc countries like Ukraine to join NATO. And that would put more pressure on him. But I think right now that, the lack of effort to sanction Russia is ultimately creating and emboldening Russia to go further and further. 12 days ago, Democrats used the filibuster to prevent sanctions against Russia for the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. And that kind of, what that decision shows me is that they're not willing to stand against Russia and sanctioning. And what that decision also makes me in fear of, it makes many people in fear of, is that the neocon warmongers in Washington, D.C. actually would like a war with Russia. It's very profitable, especially now that, all these government contractors and companies and lobbyists have lost Afghanistan and the billions of dollars they made off of Afghanistan. Now they need another war. And they're influencing the decisions in Washington, D.C., to not to use the filibuster to go against that Nord Stream 2 pipeline that Senator Cruz proposed, really shows that they're not willing to do sanctioning and okay with putting the U.S. in a position to potentially be in a conflict with Russia, which is extremely scary.
Yeah, it is extremely scary. I mean, as I mentioned, at the top of the interview, we talked about Afghanistan. Obviously, we were there for 20 years, just to, pull out after 20 years. The Pentagon press secretary, John Kirby, spoke, I believe it was on Monday, about, how 8,500 troops were put on heightened alert, for potential deployment to Eastern Europe. What would have to be that trigger for the U.S. to, go full force troops on the ground in Ukraine?
Well, I mean, I think first of all, I'll say this. I think there's a lot of posturing by the White House to make this something it's not. The White House wants to control the narrative and kind of do the smoke and mirrors, like, look at this big thing in Ukraine with Russia. Don't look at all these things that, we're doing wrong and all these blunders that we're having. Forget about Afghanistan. And so they would love for this to blow up bigger than what it is. And I mean, Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council's Secretary, I think it's Danilov, said on Tuesday that the hysteria that the Biden administration has created has caused more internal destabilization than the potential invasion itself. The number one issue is the propaganda that's coming out of our White House. This is Ukraine saying this. They're saying it's the number one issue over a potential invasion. And then Ukrainian President Zelensky told the Ukrainian people to disregard any agitated statements that that we hear from the Biden administration, from President Biden himself, that the agitation that's coming from the White House is causing more of a problem than Russia actually going deeper into Ukraine. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like, the White House is using our military to create a scenario that's maybe not as imminent as it seems for Russia actually invading. It's destabilizing the Ukrainian currency, which is obviously not good for any country, to create this hysteria. And so it's really hard for anyone to predict. I mean, me included, and I'm no military strategist or anything, but it's really hard for anyone to predict what would cause this White House to put boots on the ground and be head to head with the Russian military, because we just don't know what this White House is going to do. We don't know what motivates them. They're clearly making decisions and saying things that aren't reality on the ground, and I believe they're motivated by lobbyists who actually would love nothing more than a conflict. The neocons and warmongers in Washington D.C. would love nothing more than this, to have this conflict. I mean, we're not trusted in the world right now because of the decisions we made. The French and Germans right now, they're having a meeting. The French and Germans are leading a meeting, kind of a global summit on Ukraine in Europe, and that's going in the next few days. Mm-hmm. The United States is not invited to that meeting. All the world powers are going to this meeting about how to handle Ukraine, and the United States has been left out of that conversation. We are not respected in the war right now, primarily because of Afghanistan and the way we handled Afghanistan and the way we excluded all of them from Afghanistan, and our position on Ukraine and the decisions the White House is making right now in Ukraine. We're not respected. We're not invited we're supposed to be the world leader, and we're not invited to this meeting. And, that kind of tells the tale. So to answer your question, I'm not trying to cop out on answering it. I just don't know. No one knows what this White House is going to do. And that's the most scary thing. I mean, you got a guy who doesn't even know if the microphone's on or not, and in charge of the nuclear codes when we're talking about this conflict with Russia. It's such and the impact of this is this is something that Putin and Xi over in China, this is what they want. They want the United States to be in this position. They want the United States to look weak. They want the United States to be backed in a corner to show how weak we are when we're not going to do things like sanction Russia in this situation. And we're not doing it, and we're playing right into their hand. Everything Putin does is strategic. Former U.S. Secretary the Defense Cohen, I think last week he said that every decision Putin's making right now is calculated and intentional, and he's taking advantage of a weak commander in chief, and he is, and it's putting us in a situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And you brought up China there. The State Department Press Secretary Ned Price was actually asked about basically, this domino effect with what happens with Russia and Ukraine, and related it to, China and Taiwan, Iran, North Korea. From here, depending how this goes, how do you see China taking advantage of this situation?
Well, China's probing what we're going to do as well. I mean, they just, I think 2 days ago, they flew 39 aircraft into Taiwanian airspace, including 34 of them were fighter jets. There was a bomber that flew over Taiwan, and I think the other was 4 like satellite planes. But I mean, they're probing to see how we're going to react and what we're going to do. And when you have a weak White House, you have the world is not a safe place, and all these bad actors are going to come out. They're going to start probing and pushing the limits to see what they can get away with. And at some point, a line's going to be crossed. I mean, one thing about President Biden is he's kind of a passive aggressive guy. He doesn't have a very strong stance, but he responds emotionally. He's a hothead. Everybody said President Trump was a hothead. President Trump was the only president in decades that kept us out of a war. President Trump was not a warmonger, and I'm not grandstanding President Trump here. I'm showing the contrast. President Biden is a hothead, and when you have a weak person that's a hothead, they'll be passive, and let people push these boundaries like Russia and China are going to do, and then they'll react spontaneously and light a fuse that may not be able to put out. And I think that's something that should terrify every American. And we need to be engaging with our senators and congressmen to make sure that the pressure is being put on the White House not to make a devastating reaction to this, and handle it the right way. Handle it diplomatically. That's why we have a State Department. Handle it through sanctions. Russia is at the mercy of sanctions. They don't want to be sanctioned. They don't want NATO to come down on them. We have the ability to do that. We don't have to have troops on the ground and fight in a face-to-face war with America and Russia. I mean, I think if you did a poll, like who wants to see America and Russia go to war, 100% of Americans would say absolutely not, including all of our military leaders and advisors. When you speak of the military leaders and advisors, we still have the same national security team in place that botched Afghanistan. Not one of them has been fired. Every one of them is still in charge of our national security team. And that should be terrifying as well, because clearly they did a horrific job. We still have Americans left in Afghanistan. And now they're saying, you have the White House saying, hey, if you're American in Ukraine, you need to leave on your own. The military is not going to come get you. We're not going to help you. You have to get out on your own. We're already saying this before it's even happening. And so, we could have another catastrophe with, allies and Americans in Ukraine. And so I think, we need to fire our national security team. President Biden wanted to put the blame on someone else. He could have put the blame on them. Although leadership, you should always take responsibility at the highest level, including the commander in chief, but at least he could fire them and replace them with a competent national security team.
It's interesting. As soon as I saw that news about, the U.S. government not being in a position to evacuate U.S. citizens, I immediately thought of you and our previous conversations about Afghanistan and how, as you mentioned, Americans are still stranded over there, unable to leave. And now, once again, we're seeing Americans being stranded in Ukraine, as we see in Ukraine this threat from Russia continuing to build up. One last question for you. We talked about the Biden administration, obviously, a lot, and their handling of this situation. Do you have a message for our commander in chief about this current situation in Ukraine?
Yeah, take charge and do it a strong leader would do. Stop standing on a pulpit and telling them and threatening action, and take action. But take action economically. Take action where it's going to hurt, where it's going to make people react. I mean, right now, Germany, because of our decisions, Germany has stopped sending military aid to the Ukrainians. Why? Because Germany needs Russian oil. We have the ability to intercede there. We have the ability to sanction Russia and put the pressure on Russia. We have the ability to influence NATO. And President Biden, you have the ability to make these things happen. If you really do not want to see a war between America and Russia, if you really want to protect our U.S. service members and not have our American sons and daughters go fight a war that they should never, ever be faced to fight, then you have the power and ability to shut this down through economic sanctions and putting the pressure where the pressure needs to be put. And have the courage to do that. Talk to your party, the Democrat Party, and question them. Why would they use the filibuster to not put sanctions on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline? I mean, that's the control we have over Russia. We don't need a war. We don't need to have military intervention. We have the power by being the world leader to handle this the right way.